Have you ever heard your own mother say she wished you were never born? Not in a heat of the moment argument, not during a drunken spiral at home, but in front of all your friends, your colleagues, your partner, on your 30th birthday, with a glass of champagne raised and a smile like she was proud of it. I still hear the clink of glasses just before the words left her lips, like the universe giving me one last second of innocence before it shattered everything. It was the kind of night you see in magazine spreads. String lights woven through the backyard trees, a jazz trio softly playing near the patio, white lanterns swaying in the warm Los Angeles breeze. I had planned every detail. I didn't throw parties often, but this one mattered. 30 was a milestone, a checkpoint. I had survived enough of my 20s to feel I'd earned a little joy. My boyfriend Nate helped me hang the lights. My best friend Alyssa brought the custom cake, and the guest list was small but meaningful. I wanted the people I loved around me. I wanted to feel like I belonged. And yes, maybe deep down, I still wanted her approval. My mother, Linda, showed up late as always, in heels that clicked too loudly, and a dress that said, "Look at me," louder than any words. She hugged me stiffly, air kissed both cheeks, and handed me a gift bag that smelled like department store perfume. She knew how to make an entrance, and she knew how to suck the air out of a room. I knew what she was. I knew what she'd always been. But she was still my mother. So when she tapped her glass for a toast, I smiled politely. When she said my name and everyone turned toward us, I held my breath. When she said if I could go back in time, I wouldn't have had her, I froze. At first, there was a moment of laughter, the kind that tries to turn discomfort into something else. Maybe they thought it was a joke. Maybe they were hoping it was. But she didn't laugh. She sipped her champagne and let the silence bloom around us like a slow poison. My heart started pounding in my ears, but my face stayed frozen in a mask of polite disbelief. I laughed, too high pitched, too quick, and said something I can't even remember. Something to smooth it over, something to make everyone feel less awkward, because that's what I'd always done. I got through the rest of the party with a smile that felt like glass splinters in my cheeks. I opened gifts I didn't see. I thanked people I barely heard. When the last guest left and the lights were still twinkling over empty chairs, I sat down on the grass in my dress and cried for the first time in a long time. Not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. Linda had always been like this. Not outwardly cruel, at least not in a way you could call out without sounding dramatic, but constantly undermining, constantly shifting the ground beneath my feet. When I was little, she'd buy me a birthday gift and then remind me how much it cost. She'd call me her little burden when I was sick or say I was too sensitive when I cried. I spent most of my life believing I was the problem. Even after my parents divorced when I was 12, I clung to the idea that I could earn her love. Maybe if I got better grades. Maybe if I got into a good college. Maybe if I became successful. I did all of those things. I built a life far from the chaos of her world. I became a marketing director by 28, had my own condo, a healthy relationship, and a friend group who actually liked me for me. But somehow, when she walked into any room I was in, I was 12 again, apologizing, shrinking, hoping I didn't call her after the party. I couldn't. I avoided the photos. I left her gift in the back of my closet, unopened. For a week, I stayed in this fog of numbness, bouncing between fury and sadness like a pendulum that wouldn't stop swinging. And then came the call. Her name lit up my phone, and I almost didn't answer. But curiosity, or maybe old habits, got the better of me. I picked up, expecting an apology, even a fake one. Instead, I got tears, hysterical ones. She was getting evicted. Again. Her voice trembled as she said, "Just for a few weeks, I have nowhere to go. You have that guest room. I'm your mother." No mention of what she'd said at the party. No hint of regret. Just another crisis she wanted me to solve. Another fire she lit and now expected me to put out. My fingers trembled as I held the phone. That old reflex, the one that wanted to say yes, to fix it, to be the good daughter, kicked in for a second. And then, like a curtain lifting, I saw the pattern. I saw the game. And I realized I didn't want to play it anymore. I told her no. I said it quietly, almost gently, but it echoed like a gunshot in my chest. Her reaction was instant, screaming, accusations. You're heartless. You're ungrateful. I gave you life and this is how you repay me? It was a greatest hits album of guilt and venom played on a loop. But I didn't flinch this time. I didn't cry. I didn't try to explain. I just hung up. And then I blocked her. What happened after that changed everything, but in ways I couldn't have imagined. Because Linda wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The first few days after I blocked her felt like breathing after holding your breath underwater for too long. It wasn't relief exactly, more like the space before pain hits. That strange calm when your body knows something's coming, but not quite when. I half expected her to show up at my door, pounding and sobbing and making a scene like she had before. But instead, it was quiet. Too quiet. Which, when it came to Linda, was never a good sign. It didn't take long before I started getting calls from relatives I hadn't heard from in months. Aunt Marcy, who never liked me much but pretended to for family functions, left a voicemail dripping with passive aggression. I heard what happened. It's really disappointing, Emma. She's your mother. Then came texts from my cousin Lexi asking if everything was okay, followed by a Facebook message from a second cousin in Michigan telling me to remember where you came from. I was stunned. It was like they were all reading from the same script. And then I realized they were. Linda had activated the sympathy machine. She was a master at it. I could practically picture her curled up on some friend's couch with a glass of wine, telling everyone how her ungrateful daughter had turned her away, how she was on the verge of homelessness, how all she'd ever done was love me. I knew how she told these stories. She always made herself the martyr, the tragic heroine. I was either her redemption arc or her villain. There was no middle ground. I didn't respond to anyone. I didn't feel the need to defend myself anymore. That was new for me. Old me would have crafted long, thoughtful messages explaining every detail, trying to get them to understand. But this time, I just let them think what they wanted. I didn't need their approval any more than I needed hers. But then she escalated. I was in the middle of a Monday morning meeting when I got a frantic message from the receptionist downstairs. There's a woman in the lobby asking to see you. She's causing a bit of a scene. My stomach dropped. I already knew. I didn't even have to ask. I could see her in my mind. Overdone makeup, dramatic tears, waving her arms like she was auditioning for a soap opera. By the time I got down there, security was already involved. She was shouting about how I'd abandoned her, how I owed her, how I was a monster in high heels. People were staring. Phones were out. I felt the kind of panic that makes your skin hum, like a tuning fork hit too hard. My boss was watching from the other side of the glass doors, his face a mix of confusion and concern. I wanted to disappear. HR pulled me aside later that day. They were kind about it, professional. But the message was clear. This couldn't happen again. I promised it wouldn't. I made sure of it. I sent one final message through a third party. Don't ever come to my workplace again. This is harassment. If you continue, I will take legal action. And that was it. She didn't respond. She vanished again. But the damage was done. I walked around with a knot in my stomach for weeks. Part of me grieved, not for her, but for the hope I'd finally let die. The hope that one day she'd love me in a way that wasn't performative, manipulative, or transactional. That maybe, just once, she'd show up for me without taking something in return. But the truth was undeniable now. Linda didn't love me, at least not in any way that mattered. She loved control. She loved being the center of the storm. And I had finally stepped out of it. I started therapy a week later. My therapist, Angela, had a softness about her that made me feel safe in a way I hadn't expected. She didn't tell me I was overreacting. She didn't try to fix it. She just listened. And I poured it all out. The birthday toast, the eviction call, the office incident, but also the years of gaslighting, the impossible standards, the guilt masquerading as affection. I told her about how Linda would cry if I made plans that didn't include her, how she sabotaged my first serious relationship by flirting with my boyfriend, how she accidentally lost the money my dad left me for college. It was like lancing a wound I didn't even realize was infected. Angela helped me name things I'd never named before: emotional abuse, narcissistic patterns, trauma responses. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving my past, I was understanding it. And through that, I started to understand myself. But healing isn't linear. And just when I thought I was finally building something solid, something else happened. Something that would rip open everything I thought I knew. It started with a call from the storage unit. I hadn't even remembered my name was on it. Apparently, it had been under both mine and Linda's since I was 19. One of those small, dusty containers where we dumped boxes when she moved out of my dad's house. The manager said the monthly payment hadn't gone through in 3 months, and if I didn't claim it soon, everything inside would be auctioned off. My first instinct was to ignore it. I didn't care about any of her old junk. But something nagged at me, a strange, persistent pull. I took a half day off work, drove out to Glendale, and signed the paperwork. The air inside the unit was thick with dust and neglect. Most of the boxes were falling apart, half labeled in smudged marker. Emma, school stuff. Linda, winter clothes. Photos. Just seeing her handwriting made my chest tighten. I dug through slowly, unsure of what I was even looking for. There were old birthday cards, broken picture frames, a few worn dresses she'd probably never wear again. But then, buried beneath a pile of moldy books, I found a journal. It wasn't mine. The leather was cracked and worn, like it had been carried around for years. The initials LK were embossed faintly on the front, Linda's full name. I sat down right there on the cold concrete floor and opened it. The first few pages were typical Linda, dramatic, chaotic, rambling. But then I got to an entry from around the time I was 10. The handwriting looked rushed, and the ink had bled through in spots. It read, I love her, I do. But God, sometimes I look at her and I see everything I gave up, everything I lost. I didn't want this. I wasn't ready. If Greg hadn't insisted, I would have ended the pregnancy. I wanted to, but he said it would have fixed things. What a joke. Nothing got fixed. My breath caught. I reread the paragraph twice, 3 times, hoping I'd misunderstood. I hadn't. She was talking about me, about almost not having me, and not with grief or regret, but with bitterness, with resentment. My father had died in a car accident when I was 13, and up until that moment, I had believed, really believed, that I was the only good thing that came from their messy marriage. Now, I wasn't so sure. I flipped further. Entry after entry painted a picture of someone unraveling. There were notes about money schemes, seducing men for rent, using my name to open credit cards, even stealing from my dad's wallet before he left for work. She wrote about punishing Greg for leaving her by making me hate him. She admitted to hiding letters he'd written me from college and keeping the birthday checks he sent after they divorced. My hands were shaking by then. But the worst part, what gutted me more than anything, was an entry from a few years ago. After I got my first big promotion, she wrote, she thinks she's so successful, but none of it matters if I'm not part of it. Let's see how far she gets when I remind her who raised her. She owes me. I made her. I can break her. That was the moment I realized. The toast wasn't a slip of the tongue. It wasn't a wine-fueled mistake. It was intentional. It was a warning. And I'd been too numb, too conditioned to see it for what it was. I took the journal home and hid it at the back of my closet. For days, I couldn't sleep. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with my heart pounding like I was being chased. All the therapy in the world couldn't have prepared me for that kind of revelation. My mother hadn't just been toxic. She had actively tried to sabotage my life. She'd see me not as a daughter, but as leverage, as a pawn. One night, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the journal until the sun came up. And for the first time, I allowed myself to feel something new, not just grief or anger, but freedom. Because the truth had already been there, hidden under layers of guilt and denial. Now, I had proof. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't the problem. But I also knew something else. If I'd found this, someone else could too. Someone who might not be so kind. Someone who could use it against me. Because the thing about truth is, once it's out, it spreads. And I had no idea who else might already know. The first sign that something was wrong came 2 weeks later. A client I'd worked with for years, a steady, respectful partnership, suddenly pulled out of a campaign. No warning, no explanation, just a terse email thanking me for past efforts and expressing a desire to move in another direction. I didn't think much of it at first. These things happen in marketing, shifts in vision, new leadership, budget constraints. But then another project fell through, then another, and then I got the call. It was from Carol, someone I'd networked with at industry events for years. She was soft spoken, but firm. She said she was calling as a courtesy, which I already knew meant something terrible was coming. She told me someone had been reaching out to companies I'd worked with, spreading concerning allegations, emails, voicemails, even one in person meeting. The claims were vague. Something about me being mentally unstable, emotionally abusive, fraudulent. Nothing concrete, but just enough to sow doubt. And worst of all, just believable enough to stick. I didn't have to guess who was behind it. Linda had always been good at weaponizing narrative. It was her superpower. And she had clearly found a new way to punish me for saying no. This time, it wasn't about family loyalty or emotional guilt. It was about destroying what I'd built, my career, my credibility, my name. I sat at my desk long after the call ended, my coffee cold, my screen flickering with unread emails. I felt paralyzed, not with fear, but with a kind of exhausted disbelief. How many more lives did I have to live through this? How many more versions of myself would I have to rebuild before she finally let me go? I called Angela, my therapist, and scheduled an emergency session. I needed to ground myself before I made a mistake, because the version of me that wanted revenge was starting to get louder, the version that wanted to release the journal, to publish it, to show everyone the truth, in her own words. But Angela said something that stopped me in my tracks. She asked, "If you go down that road, what are you trying to win?" At first I didn't understand. Wasn't it obvious? Justice, closure, validation. But then I sat with it, let it sink in, and I realized what I really wanted was for her to feel it, to finally feel what she had made me feel: powerless, exposed, alone. And that scared me, because the moment you become like them, vindictive, obsessed, hollow, you've already lost. So instead, I took a different path, one that didn't feel satisfying at first, but would end up changing everything. I started documenting, quietly, carefully. I compiled a file with dates, screenshots, emails, messages from people warning me about her. I reached out to a lawyer, not to sue, not yet, but to create a paper trail, to protect myself. I wasn't going to stoop to her level, but I wasn't going to let her win either. Around that time, I got a message from someone I hadn't seen in years. Mark, my father's old business partner. He was kind, older now, and always treated me like an adult, even when I was just a teenager trailing behind him in his office. He'd heard about the situation through the grapevine. He didn't say who told him, but he asked if I was okay. And then he said something that sent chills down my spine. He said, "I think there's something you need to know, something your mom may never have told you." I met him at a quiet diner on the outskirts of town the next day. We sat in a booth near the window, the sun casting soft shadows across our coffee cups. Mark looked at me with a heaviness I hadn't seen before. Then he pulled out a yellowed envelope and slid it across the table. Inside were 3 letters, all addressed to me, all from my dad. I couldn't breathe. He said my dad had given them to Linda before he died, asked her to give them to me when I turned 16, 18, and 21. But she never did. Mark had a feeling, he said, so he'd made copies, just in case. My hands trembled as I opened the first letter. My dad's handwriting was unmistakable, neat, looping, warm. He wrote about how proud he was of me, how he hoped I never stop dreaming big, how he wished he could be there to see the woman I'd become. And then he wrote about her. He warned me, gently but clearly. Your mother loves in a way that can feel like fire, bright and consuming, but not all warmth is safe. Protect your light, Emma. Don't let anyone steal it, not even the people who claim to have given it to you. I sat there, tears running down my face, surrounded by the hum of diners clinking forks and coffee spoons. And something in me broke open, but not in a painful way. It was like I was finally being seen, heard, loved, not by Linda, but by the one parent who had always tried, even when he couldn't be there. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to publish the journal. I wasn't going to retaliate. I was going to build a new story, one that didn't center her, one where I was the main character, and the villain no longer had a script. But just when I thought I'd taken back control, another truth emerged, one I never saw coming. It came from a place I never expected. My cousin Rachel. We hadn't spoken in years, not since the last Christmas disaster when Linda accused her of being jealous of me. Something about a boyfriend Rachel had brought to dinner who made the mistake of complimenting my dress. But out of the blue, I got a message on LinkedIn. Not Facebook, not Instagram, LinkedIn. That alone made my stomach tighten. She said she'd been meaning to reach out, but didn't want to get involved in family drama. But something had been weighing on her for years. Something about my mom, something about me. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop downtown. Neutral ground. It was awkward at first. Lots of tight smiles and small talk. But then she leaned in and said, Emma, I didn't know if you already knew. I always thought maybe you had your reasons for never talking about it. I asked her what she meant. She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo, a scan of an old document, a birth certificate. Only it wasn't mine. It was a different name. Same birth date, same hospital, same mother. But the father's name wasn't Greg, my dad. It was someone else, a man I'd never heard of. At first, I didn't believe it. I thought it had to be a mistake, a misprint, some kind of legal confusion. But Rachel just looked at me with that kind of nervous sympathy people reserve for tragedies. She told me Linda had confided in her mother, my aunt who passed years ago, that Greg wasn't my biological father, that she'd met someone during one of their many separations, gotten pregnant, and then lied to Greg to save the marriage. Apparently, Greg knew. That's why they split for good. But he stayed, at least for a while, because he'd already bonded with me. Chose to raise me anyway. I don't even know how I made it home that day. I drove in silence, my hands numb on the wheel, everything outside the windshield a blur. The ground beneath me had always felt shaky when it came to my mom, but now it felt like the last stable piece, my identity, my origin, had just been swept away in a single photo. I spent the next few days in a kind of trance. I reread my dad's letters over and over, looking for signs, looking for any hint of the truth I hadn't seen before. And in the second letter, the one he meant for me at 18, I found it. There are things I wanted to tell you in person, things I wanted to explain when you were old enough to understand. I won't get that chance now, but just know this. Being your father was always a choice I made every day, and I never once regretted it. Blood doesn't make a parent. Love does. And you, Emma, you were the greatest choice I ever made. I cried so hard that night I made myself sick. I wasn't angry at him. If anything, I felt closer to him than ever. He had loved me despite everything, because of everything. But I couldn't stop thinking about the man whose name I now knew, who might still be alive. I debated for days whether to reach out. What would I even say? Hi, I might be your daughter, and my mother never told you I existed? But curiosity is a stubborn thing. It plants seeds in your mind and waits patiently for you to crack. I found him easily. He was still in California, a retired architect. No social media, but a small business website. I called once, hung up, called again, let it ring 5 times before ending the call. On the third try, I left a voicemail. I didn't say much, just my name, that I had questions, that I believed we might be connected. I didn't expect him to respond. But 2 days later, he did. He left a message on my phone, calm, gentle, a bit unsure. He said my name sounded familiar. He asked if we could meet. We chose a quiet park halfway between our cities. I wore a sweater my dad had given me before he died. It still smelled faintly like him, cologne and old leather. My heart felt like it was beating in my throat. He was waiting on a bench, a tall man with silver hair and kind eyes. When I approached, he stood and smiled, and for a second I saw something in his face that felt eerily familiar. A shape in the jaw, a curve in the brow. We talked for over an hour. I told him what I knew. He listened, stunned but open. He said he had dated Linda briefly, just a few months, that it ended suddenly, with no explanation. He never knew she was pregnant, never heard from her again. He wanted to know me, not as a father necessarily, but as a person, as someone who had, somehow, become a living piece of a secret he'd never been given a chance to claim. I didn't know what to feel. I was still grieving the dad who raised me, still healing from the mother who hurt me. And now, this man, this new chapter, sat across from me offering a connection I never even imagined. It wasn't simple, it wasn't healing, but it was real. And then, just as I was leaving, he handed me a small envelope. "Your mother sent this," he said, "years ago. I didn't open it. I didn't know what it was about. I just kept it." Back at home, I stared at it for hours. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, tight, loopy, controlling. I opened it with trembling hands. What I read inside changed everything again. The letter was short, 3 paragraphs. Not the dramatic confession I expected. It didn't even mention me by name, but every word was laced with the venom I'd grown used to. Even without speaking directly to me, Linda knew how to twist the knife. "You were nothing but a distraction." A lesson I never wanted to learn. I knew from the beginning that you weren't going to last. You were too nice, too hopeful. That kind of man is easy to walk away from. I needed someone who could give me a future, not a hobby. So I took what I wanted. I left. You were just a stop along the way. No signature, no date, just that. An emotional sledgehammer tucked inside a pale envelope that had survived 20-some years in a desk drawer. I felt my stomach churn as I read it again and again. And he'd been kind to her, and she had discarded him like trash, like she did with everyone, including me. But this time it hit different because I finally saw it clearly. The pattern wasn't mine to fix. It never had been. I'd spent most of my life thinking if I were better, more obedient, more loving, more successful, then maybe she would finally become the mother I needed. But this man, this stranger who had done nothing wrong except trust her, he got the same cruelty, the same hollow goodbye, the same empty wound. I realized then that Linda didn't destroy people because they deserved it. She did it because it gave her power, because it kept her from ever feeling small, and maybe, deep down, because she hated the reflection she saw in people who tried to love her. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat on my living room floor, surrounded by photo albums I hadn't opened in years. Pictures of birthdays, holidays, school plays, snapshots of forced smiles and posed happiness. And her, always in the middle, always styled to perfection, always performing. My life had been a stage, and she'd been the star. I was just a prop. I didn't cry. Not this time. I felt something colder, something deeper. Finality. I took the envelope, the letter, and every picture that still featured her, and I put them in a shoebox. Then I carried that box to the curb. Not out of spite, not out of anger, just Release. I didn't need physical proof anymore. The pain was memory enough. In the following weeks, I went back to therapy with a different kind of purpose. We didn't just talk about the past. We talked about who I was without it, about the woman I could become without the weight of her expectations crushing me. I realized I'd never truly asked myself what I wanted. I had spent so long being the opposite of her, controlled, stable, neat, that I never questioned whether that was me or just armor. So I started taking risks, small ones at first. I joined a community ceramics class. I said yes to a date with a man who made documentaries about city infrastructure, not my usual type, but kind, soft spoken, interested in me, not just my image. I let myself laugh more, say no more, rest more. The shift was slow, but it was real. I stayed in touch with the man who might be my biological father. We didn't jump into some fairy tale reunion, but we met for lunch every month, swapped stories, traded books. He never pushed. He just showed up. Something about that felt profound, healing even. Then, one morning, 6 months after our meeting, I got a phone call from a private number. I let it go to voicemail. When I played it back, my heart stopped. It was Linda. Her voice was shaky, unrecognizable. She sounded older, smaller. There was no rage this time, no insults, no manipulation. Just one line. I have cancer, stage 4. I don't have anyone else. I dropped the phone. I thought I was past this. I thought I was strong enough now to hear from her and feel nothing. But her voice, so frail, so unlike her, hit something inside me I didn't know was still raw. Part of me wanted to delete the message, pretend it never came. But another part of me, the girl who once waited on the stairs for a kiss goodnight, that part listened again and again. I didn't know what to do. Every cell in my body screamed that I owed her nothing, that I had finally carved out peace, that she had burned every bridge, salted the earth, and still expected me to rebuild the path. But she was dying. I stared at my reflection in the mirror that night, trying to decide what kind of person I wanted to be. Not for her, for me. Was it strength to walk away? Or strength to show up? I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the ticking of the wall clock, my thoughts louder than any sound. Her voice replayed in my head like a haunting melody I couldn't mute. I tried to picture her as she was when I was a child. Beautiful, commanding, the kind of woman who made every room hers the moment she walked in. But in my mind, that image kept slipping, warping into something smaller, frailer, a shadow of herself. A woman begging for comfort in her final days. I hated that it affected me. I hated that after everything she had done, part of me still felt something. Pity, sadness, guilt. That familiar, insidious guilt that always came when she cried or begged or broke. I had spent years trying to escape it, building walls so tall I forgot how to feel anything for her. But grief doesn't ask for permission. It comes in waves, crashing even when you think you're safe from the tide. I didn't call her back right away. I needed time. I spoke to my therapist, who reminded me I wasn't obligated to do anything. That it wasn't about being a good daughter or a bad one. It was about choosing what aligned with the life I was building now. A life that prioritized peace over obligation, healing over performance. But eventually, I did call her. I don't know why. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was closure. Maybe some foolish, wounded part of me still wanted her to say sorry. She sounded surprised to hear from me. Her voice cracked when she said my name, and for a moment, I imagined the mother I always wanted was finally on the line. But that illusion shattered quickly. She didn't apologize. Not really. She talked about her pain, her loneliness, her regrets in vague terms. But she never said, "I'm sorry for what I did to you." Never acknowledged that toast, or the years of emotional warfare, or the fact that she tried to ruin my life when I finally said no. Still, I agreed to visit her. I told myself it was to say goodbye, to close a chapter. But deep down, I think I still needed to see it for myself, that she was truly dying, that there wouldn't be another twist, another manipulation, another guilt trip hiding behind crocodile tears. She was in a hospice center on the edge of the city. It was clean, quiet, filled with that sterile stillness that only comes when people are waiting to die. When I walked into her room, she looked up from her bed, and for a moment, she didn't recognize me. Her eyes were sunken, her skin papery and pale, her once perfect hair thinned and matted against the pillow. She looked older than 58. She looked like life had finally stopped indulging her. When recognition hit, she smiled weakly and reached for my hand. I hesitated, then took it. We sat in silence for a while. She asked about my work, my apartment, whether I was seeing anyone. All small talk, all surface level. I answered politely, but distantly. It felt like talking to a stranger who had memorized facts about me but never actually knew me. Eventually, she whispered, "You've always been strong, stronger than me." It was the closest thing to an apology I ever got. I didn't cry, I didn't hug her, but I didn't walk out either. Over the next few weeks, I visited her 3 more times. Each time, I stayed a little longer. Not for her, but for me. To prove that I could be near the wreckage without letting it bury me. That I could be kind without being pulled back into her orbit. She died one morning just before sunrise. The hospice called me because I was listed as her emergency contact. There was no dramatic moment, no final words, just a quiet exit, the way she had never lived. I didn't hold a funeral. There was no one to invite, no friends, no family that hadn't already cut ties. I signed the papers, arranged for her cremation, and had her ashes scattered in the ocean, far from anywhere I called home. Afterward, I stood at the shore for a long time, watching the wave carry her away, and I realized something unexpected. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad either. I was free. Not because she was gone, but because I'd finally stopped needing her to be someone she never was. And in that space, where grief used to live, something new began to bloom: peace. I never thought justice would come, not really. I thought closure meant letting go, walking away, rebuilding in silence. But sometimes justice doesn't knock gently. Sometimes it kicks the damn door in. 2 months after scattering her ashes, I received a letter from a lawyer. It was about her estate, or rather, what was left of it. She had nothing but debts, credit cards maxed out, unpaid hospital bills, loans she had taken out in my name. I stared at the paperwork, numb at first, then burning with rage. That woman had tried to trap me even from the grave. But she made one fatal mistake. She underestimated the woman I'd become. I didn't ignore it. I fought. I gathered every scrap of documentation showing she forged my signature on a loan agreement. I hired a forensic accountant who traced how she'd funneled money using my credentials, and I filed a case. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the principle. It was about proving, finally, undeniably, that I had been her victim for far too long. The court case took months. I sat across from representatives of the debt collectors and the hospital, explaining how my mother had impersonated me to secure credit, how she had manipulated documents and used my identity. I submitted old texts, voicemails, bank statements, everything. And then I went further. I submitted a video, footage from my office's lobby, the day she came screaming and demanding I support her. The courtroom watched her unravel in high definition. And for the first time, it wasn't just my word against hers. It was evidence, cold, undeniable, brutal. When the judge ruled in my favor, I felt my chest crack open. The debts were invalidated. Her remaining property, her old jewelry, clothes, anything of value, was auctioned off to cover her personal liabilities. Her name was officially flagged for fraud. Her final act of manipulation was exposed, legally and publicly. She didn't get to leave this world as a misunderstood mother. She left it as what she truly was: an abuser, a liar, a user. And as for the relatives who once called me heartless, they came crawling back. One aunt messaged me saying, "We didn't know how bad it was. We're sorry." I didn't reply. I owed them nothing. They were complicit in their silence. But the most unexpected justice came from the people I never expected to speak up. Two women, both of whom had dated my mother in the years after her divorce, reached out to me. They told me about the emotional destruction she left in her wake, how she used them, how she turned on them when they needed her most. We weren't just daughters and exes, we were survivors. And together, we wrote a statement. We submitted it to an advocacy group that raises awareness about financial and emotional abuse within families. My mother, who once thrived on being admired, was now a cautionary tale, a faceless name in a case study about generational trauma and covert narcissism. And me? I moved. I left the apartment she once tried to invade and bought a new place on the coast. It was smaller but brighter, filled with things I chose. Soft linens, terracotta mugs, books stacked everywhere. A sunlit nook where I drank coffee with no fear of unexpected calls. I started hiking again. I took weekends off, I laughed more, I met someone. A gentle soul with kind eyes who never tried to fix me, just listened. He asked once quietly, "Do you miss her?" And I told him the truth. No. But sometimes I miss what I hoped she'd be. In time, I wrote about it. Not in a diary, but publicly, an anonymous essay that went viral. Women messaged me from all over the world saying, "That was my mother too." Some were still trapped, some were healing, and some, like me, had drawn the line. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was giving others the words that I once couldn't find. But life doesn't end with a clean bow. It never does. One afternoon, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a small velvet box, and in it, my mother's favorite ring, the emerald one she swore she'd be buried with. There was no note, just the cold metal and the unspoken weight of it. I stared at it for a long time. And then I walked to the edge of the cliff behind my house where the sea met the sky. I held the ring one last time, then threw it as far as I could, watched it disappear into the blue. She no longer had a place here. And as the wind kissed my face, I smiled, not with triumph, not with regret, but with peace. "You always said I was ungrateful," I whispered into the wind. "Turns out you were right. I'm not grateful for what you gave me. I'm proud of what I built in spite of it." And I turned away, finally walking forward with nothing left to prove. The story is now finished.